Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Flashenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening. Hi, I'm Deb Flashenberg. I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies, and today we have a really fun podcast. We're talking about Enneagram types. We're going to talk about how to approach supporting pregnant people in labor based on their Enneagram. It's something I hadn't actually thought of before, but it just makes a lot of sense. It's a little bit about just self-knowledge, learning what your Enneagram is, understanding some of your traits and what kind of support you may need, how you may be reacting to things. I think it's really interesting. And it's just one of those fun kind of off-the-cuff conversations I think you're going to enjoy. So to have this conversation, I have Cortney Clegg and Stephanie King. Cortney and Stephanie are certified childbirth educators and doulas. They are also the hosts of the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast, where they give tons of practical tips and holistic advice on pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. It's a great conversation. We go through all 9 Enneagram types, a little snapshot of what some of the traits are. And it's just fun thinking about, am I that one? Am I that one? Am I a little bit of that one? So I think you'll enjoy this conversation. Before we get to that, I want to give you guys a heads up that we've got a free downloadable, 5 simple solutions to the most common pregnancy pains. So if you're uncomfortable, if you have back pain or shoulder pain or neck pain or hip pain, chances are it's on my list of 5 simple solutions to the most common pregnancy pains. And I've got a solution for you. So just go to the website, prenatalYogaCenter.com, and grab that. And then to also help you feel at your best during your pregnancy, we've got live prenatal yoga classes 7 days a week to help you join the community, to help you feel healthy and well in your body, to alleviate common aches and pains, to help you get ready for birth. We've got it covered, prenatal yoga every day. And of course, we have postnatal and baby and me. And the last thing I just want to remind you guys, I've had people asking, do you think you're going to have your teacher training online for much longer? And yes, we are going to have 2 more teacher trainings in the fall online. We'll see what happens after that. But if you're thinking of taking the training, you don't want to deal with travel, we've got you covered. We have it online. Check that out, of course, at prenatalYogaCenter.com. Okay, I think that's enough. So we're going to take a super quick break, and when we come back, please enjoy my conversation about Enneagram types. Hi, Cortney. Hi, Stephanie. How are you?
Hello, we're well. Hi, happy to be here.
Oh, good. I am so excited to talk to you about this. Right. So, okay, was I pronouncing it right? Enneagram, is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. It's something I feel like I've seen on social media, on Facebook and stuff, people talking about it. And I hadn't really thought about it until I started digging into some of the work you guys do and how I know you're not experts, I know, but like, it's just something that we can chat about. I hadn't even considered looking at birth clients or students through the lens of what their Enneagram might be and then how you work with them. So this is new to me and kind of exciting. So, yay. So thank you for being on my podcast and talking about this with me.
Our pleasure. We loved studying this topic ourselves because I feel like birth should be approached in such a way that individualizes the experience for each woman. And this just kind of adds to that layer of how can we make this your birth? How can we help you have the best experience that you can and that you want to have? So we love that aspect.
Oh, right. And I think too, when you have a woman that you've never met before in front of you, and definitely when you were talking about birth, in a very vulnerable space, having some kind of background information that you can pull from, I find is really useful too.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we jump into that, let me just hear a little bit about both of you. If you can tell me a little bit about yourselves, how you got into birth work, and how the 2 of you ended up working together.
Cortney pointed at me, but I'm like shaking my head. Your turn. No.
Well, Stephanie and I are both doulas, and we're both certified childbirth educators. And we actually met at a doula training together many, many years ago. We won't tell you how many ago, and really kind of hit it off. We were both teaching the same thing and really kind of hit it off that way. So I have 4 kids. I've had 4 unmedicated births, some in hospital, some out of hospital. And I love the work that you do. I think when you talk to a lot of birth workers, you'll hear them say often that this is something they felt called to. This is a work that they felt pulled to. And I know that's certainly true for both of us. As we were teaching this particular birth course that there were some things in there that just kind of weren't my favorite, I guess you could say. And I approached Stephanie with the idea of creating an online course together that could serve more women. And that's what we set out to do.
Well, how long ago was that?
Oh, that's a good question.
I think it's been about 4 years now. Yeah.
Oh, wow. All right. So you guys have been kind of joined at the hip ever since. I really like that.
For better or for worse, right?
It's like a marriage.
My second marriage.
Yeah, totally.
So, all right, let's jump into this. I'm just so excited to talk about supporting pregnant people in labor based on their Enneagram. So to be honest, again, I know very little about this, but super interested. So maybe we can start for the person that's kind of like me. Can you even explain what an Enneagram is?
Yeah. So, Enneagram, and we kind of talk about this. So we have some podcast episodes ourselves, and we have like this brief intro in front of it, and it's to give just a quick overview of it. And so it's a diagram with 9 points that illustrate the 9 human character structures. They're 9 different but connected types. And so it doesn't necessarily tell us what we do, but it tells us why we do it. So I think that's like the basis, the overview.
I love it. There is a quote from someone who is an Enneagram expert. She's Beth at Your Enneagram Coach online, but she says that the Enneagram, it accurately and clearly describes why you think and feel and behave in a particular way based upon your core fears and your core desires. And it's this idea that you can use this path of self-discovery to help you transform into the healthiest, highest, truest version of yourself.
I like that. So we all have traits, and sometimes those traits might actually bring out the worst in us, but this is seeing those traits and using those traits to bring out the best. Is that right?
Exactly. I really feel like it leads to a balanced you, which leads to a really exalted version of yourself. It's helpful for me to know, for example, how I tend to behave, why I tend to behave the way I do when I'm stressed out, and why that's different from what Stephanie looks like when she's stressed out, And when you start to become self-aware of those things, it's easier to say, hold on, we're going to take a step back. I'm going to nurture myself and get back to a healthy place before proceeding.
So curious what both of you found out for your Enneagram is. And as I was looking at them, and I was almost a little bit hesitant to dive too deep into it because I wanted to be like the bohemian easygoing. That feels like that. Like that's what I'm like, oh, I'd like to see myself that way with the full knowledge. That's actually, if I took the test, that would not be the case. I was afraid it would show me like, you're controlling, you're like over organizing. And so I shied away from it because I think it would be very revealing. But if you guys took the test, did you find out or would you mind sharing? You don't have to, what your Enneagram types are.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny, and it made a lot of sense actually when we did break down and take the test, but we are both 3s. And so with Enneagram, you have a main number, you will have, whatever your main number is, and then you have something called a wing number. And that'll be either the number before your main number or the number after. So for example, since we are both 3s, you could be a 3-2 or a 3-4. And the funny part about that is that's where we differ, is I'm a 3-2. I go into the helper, and she's a 3-4. Remind me of what 4 is.
You're kind of a feeler. You're very individualistic. And so, Stephanie, that's kind of how we flavor our roles as 3, right?
Yeah.
So we're both very much achievers, very goal oriented. We like to perform and perform well. But whereas Stephanie kind of has a little bit of a flavor of the helper, for her wing 2, I'm definitely a bit more of I want to be very authentic. I feel things very deeply. And that's where my wing, I'm doing air quotes, 4 comes in.
Right.
I'm going to have to break down and do it. I feel like I'd be somewhere in that 3-2 or 3-1. It kind of reminds me of astrology a little bit of like you have your sign, and then you've got your rising sign, and then there's another. I never really studied it, but I had my chart done, and it just felt I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I'm a Scorpio with Capricorn rising, and I'm like, oh, got that fire, but that organization. So
I
it
love
reminds
that.
me. Yeah, it's quite the thing. Ask my husband.
Yeah. Keep things spicy. Huh?
Quite the combination. All right. So I know there's 9 different types. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right.
Yep. Can you briefly because I looked at them, they're pretty in depth. If you can just briefly tell me about the different Enneagrams.
Yeah. So you have Enneagram 1, which they kind of label them the perfectionist. This is a person who they've got very deep convictions. They're sort of the queens of checking off to-do lists. And so we're very grateful for the type 1s in our life.
And then we've got our type 2, which is the helper. This is the one that I relate to. I am part type 2. And so it's kind of caring and thoughtful. It makes you think of other people a lot, and they like to serve. That's kind of it. I would say too, like the hard part is like the self-care, right? Making sure that you're doing what you need for you too. And I have to say that's one thing that I loved about doing that Enneagram test is not only is it telling you like, this is where you fit in or why you have these traits, but it gives you an opportunity to see the best and to where you can improve and anyways, continue to help be your best.
So then obviously the one Steph and I are most familiar with is the type 3. This is your achiever. They're very goal oriented. They sort of like to perform for people. They like to have the best and be the best. And so that's wonderful for them. And then I'll speak to, go ahead.
I was going to ask, do they give kind of like, I'm just relating this to, again, astrology signs, because that's the small area I understand. Do they have like, I don't want to say pros and cons, but like strengths and weaknesses? So like your strength is you're a helper, but your weakness might be you are overly helping and then you deplete yourself. Like
nailed it. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, definitely. So for example, with your Enneagram 3s, sometimes they can, in their effort to perform and be the best, they can sort of be, I don't want to say inauthentic, but they feel like they have to put on this face for people. And sometimes that's not really necessarily true to who they are. And so, to be able to move to a place where as an Enneagram 3, and feel like you're acceptable and loved just for being you. There's nothing you need to do or no tasks you need to achieve in order to be lovable. So I love it. And if you're doing a deep dive into Enneagram, one of the books that I really enjoyed was The Road Back to You. And there's so many great resources out there that will kind of tell you the core fears, but also the core desires for each of these Enneagram types. And again, to reiterate, Stephanie and I are enthusiasts. We're certainly not experts. And I'm sure you're going to have some listeners going, well, I probably would have described that a little differently. And so we nod to you. We acknowledge that there's lots of information to be had here.
Yeah, this is just, I just think it's fascinating, especially if we can start to relate this to birth. All right, so we left off did we do 4? We did 3. 4, okay.
Yeah. 4, do you want to describe 4?
No, you've got the 4. Go for it.
Okay. So 4 is they're the individualist, and they are highly aware of their emotions, and they're often very in tune with their body. They feel things very deeply, and it's very important to them to be authentic, and they love cultivating unique. It's important to them too. They would rather be unique than be famous. Like the type 3 may want to be famous, the type 4 wants to be seen as authentically unique. So I think that's pretty cool.
That's so my daughter, I think she's such her own person. It's fascinating to me. All right. Sorry. Keep going.
No, it's okay. If you guys have not taken the test, you should really guess at each other before you do it. I think that's super fun. My husband and I did that.
I think maybe we will. I'm afraid, but maybe we will.
Well, and I want the update when you do it. Now I'm going to be curious. Yeah. Okay. So type 5 is kind of the investigator. And so they kind of like their mind is their sanctuary, but they're really calm in any situation. And so studying things out and being confident in what they're doing, trying to plan for others' opinions planning, not having to worry about in regards to other opinions. All of that is a benefit to them and kind of where they're happy. They're also the people who kind of three's a crowd. They want their place intimate. They enjoy that one-on-one with other people. So that's kind of their happy place.
I like that person. That sounds nice. Okay.
I know, same.
I think of 5s as you're very bohemian, just kind of, I think of the classic introvert sometimes when I think of 5s, but in a very lovely kind of a way. They don't mind being alone with their thoughts. And I think that's really cool.
See, that's what I'm saying. Like, I want to be a 5, but
Right.
I know I'm not.
It's so neat because I read all these other types. I'm like, oh, I want to be that, and I think when you get to a point where you're like, no, I'm happy being me. My type's really cool. I think that's really awesome. Okay, so then we've got type 6. They are the most loyal of any type on the Enneagram, and they're courageous and brave, and I love how committed they are to the people in their life and the beliefs that they have. And part of it, I wouldn't say it's not completely, altruistic. They hope that their loyalty will then win them the support and never having to feel alone. But people can count on type 6s, and you'll see that you need to count on those people too, if that's you.
That's interesting. All right. This is so good.
They're also, I just have to add, they're super responsible is one thing I've noticed. They're super great at planning to avoid problems and fostering cooperation. So I don't know. I look at 6 and I'm a little jealous of that type, I'll be honest.
I think that's my friend
from the beginning.
I think that's my friend Renee. She is just organized and responsible and a planner, and I can count on her, and she's grounded. I like having her in my life because of a lot of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Enneagram 7 is the enthusiast. So
these people are so fun. They're so fun.
These are the ones exactly that you want to be around. Like, you like to be around them. They put you in a good mood. They have a lot of curiosity. That's really common for them, kind of paired with creativity. So they're open to trying it all. And I think along with that is that, like, fear of missing out, right? They enjoy everything
Major
so
FOMO.
much that they just want to be involved with it all. They tend to be really positive and optimistic too, which is why it's so easy and you want to be around them all the time. And I think when it comes down to, like, kind of their needs too, it's important to understand that, having people, like, prepared around you and knowing that she's going to enjoy variety and stuff, especially, like, if we're going to talk about birth, right? Like, she needs to not just be doing one thing the whole time. Like, this is a woman that needs to, like, move around and have some variations and things to do. But definitely the person that you want to be around, she's going to put the entire birth space or any space she walks into a good mood.
Okay. So is that 7 or is that 8?
That's 7.
Okay. 8.
We've got 8, and they are the challenger. This person they're intelligent, they're courageous, they're confident, they're very decisive. They have a very commanding presence. And I think the name challenger kind of says it all. They're really not afraid to challenge anyone on any subject. And so sometimes I feel like they might be one of the most misunderstood on the Enneagram scale here, because they've got this very tough exterior shell, and they present a very tough kind of outside. They're very honest and straightforward. This is the kind of person that they're standing up to the bullies. They're very concerned with justice, but they're incredibly soft inside. Lots of passionate energy here, and very, sorry, hold on. They, I don't know, they're just very honest and straightforward. And sometimes that can be wonderful when it comes to defending the weak, but it can also be a little bit abrasive at times.
Okay. Now I feel like I see a little bit of so many people in all of these. Okay. And then 9.
Okay, so 9 is our peacemaker or the mediator. So they're really easygoing, they're reassuring, they're very agreeable and trusting. They're kind of like the 7, where they're, like, super optimistic, but not as, like, bouncy about it, right? Really supportive. They yearn for connection with others, and they tend to be really spiritual. They're in touch with their instincts. They believe things are going to work out, and they're good at staying calm and adapting to situations.
Oh, this is so interesting. All right. So now let's talk about, with those different personalities, how we approach people in birth. So I guess when you're working with a pregnant person as their doula or a childbirth educator, where do you even start? Do you have your clients, or do you encourage your students to take this test? How do you go about that?
I think we typically, so for example, within our birth course and through our podcast, we tell women, if this is something you're already drawn to, you want to understand a bit more about yourself. And I think the big question mark for so many women, especially if it's their first pregnancy, is, but what's birth going to look like for me? Mm-hmm. I can watch all these stories. I can read all these stories. I can see different women moving through birth. Some are loud, some are quiet, but what am I going to be like during birth? And if that's you and you're asking that question, then I think that knowing your Enneagram type and kind of keeping those things in the forefront of your mind as you approach it is really going to be incredibly helpful. So if that's you, go and take a test. There's some really great free ones online for sure. So I wouldn't say that we start off with, you have to know your Enneagram type for all our students, but if they fit that description, then we encourage them to do that. And then from there, what we've done with the different podcasts, we have a different podcast episode, one on each Enneagram. And we talk about the wonderful things that are going to make birth incredible for you. And then we also like to share the things that you may want to watch out for. If you're not mindful of these things, they could, I don't want to say sabotage, that sounds very dramatic, but they could prevent you from having a full experience, the experience that you want to have if you're not careful. And then, of course, we always give tips for partners, because when you've got a really great birth partner, they should be integral to helping you navigate that birth experience, and they need to know how best to support you through that whole thing.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to dive into that a little bit more, but what's really interesting is you're saying having that sense of what your Enneagram is, what you might have your tendencies to, can give you a little bit of perspective of what you might want for your birth. And it reminds me of one of the births I went on as a doula very early in my doula career. And she kept saying like, oh, I love massage. I love touch. I'm going to want this. I'm going to want that. And so I was so new. I was like, I'm going to show up. I've got all my oils. I'm going to take care of you. And then what she actually wanted was to be in the bathroom, and she was straddling the toilet looking at the wall, and her husband was one side, I was on the other, and she didn't want to be talked to or touched. She actually just wanted us in the space with her. And it was actually like doing less. Instead of being a doula, it was like do less. So I just literally we just sat there. And what we realized, if in hindsight, if we had some of course, you still never know what you're going to gravitate towards when you're in labor. But if there was a deeper look at what she may do when she's stressed and when she's uncomfortable, or just habits and personality traits that might have had us see, oh, I bet she's going to want, maybe she's more of an introvert, and she's really just going to want us to hold the space for her, to find that small secluded space where she feels safe. And so I guess having a little bit of that view of who this person is may give some hint of how to support them. Am I on to something with
totally.
that?
I don't think you can have too much information when you're walking into a space that's so vulnerable for a woman and a family. And so I think any information and all information you can have, we even talk about your love language, which is an entire other podcast conversation, right? But any and all information that you can grab to pull in not just personality, but personal experiences, to hear about the relationship with a partner and how they work together, to ask her questions about when you are in pain, physical, emotional, what does that look like for you? What do you do? What do you wish you would do? How do you cope? And does that work well for you? I think having all of that information going in is wonderful. I think also, and you can probably say the same thing as a doula then, and relate to this, but the more that you are at births, the more you tune in to the space. And so having that information, I think, is good information, but experience and learning to be in a space and read it and then move forward is really where the work gets done.
Yeah, I completely agree. It took me, I'd say, at least the first 20 births to really know the kind of questions to ask. I remember I was at a birth where the couple just were, I thought they were going to kill each other, like really bickering. And I called my mentor and I'm like, I don't know, am I mediating their marriage right now? And she's like, this might be how they actually, that's their dynamic of their relationship. And then that became a conversation piece of like, when you're under stress, how do we relate to each other? Is somebody more of the helper? Is something like, and understanding that, because I literally was like, I don't know what to do with this.
Well, and I feel like that's the exact reason why an element of any really good birth course should be fostering good communication between mom and her partner. That's not always the case. Sometimes we're getting ready to welcome a new baby, and there's some communication discoveries we need to make with our partner. And, well, this is how we've worked things out in the past. Is that the healthiest way? Is that how we want to continue to do it? I think because a woman you're so vulnerable during birth. You're very open to suggestion. You need to be surrounded by people who are loving and encouraging and supporting you. So there's got to be a certain amount of trust where that I can trust that I'm going to make this request as a birthing mom. And I trust that my partner, my doula, or whoever is supporting me is going to respond in kind, and that it's safe to request that thing. And so I really think fostering excellent communication between mom and partner is such an important aspect of birth preparation.
Absolutely. Yeah. You need to create that vulnerable space. I call it circling the wagons, that your birth team's, I have this weird names for things, but that your birth team is just holding this vulnerable space for the birthing person just to open up and not be afraid of anything. Just let themselves be that raw birthing person. All right, we're going to take a super quick break. When we come back, let's dive into some of the different approaches for the different Enneagrams. We'll be right back.
If you own a vehicle with less than 200,000 miles and have an auto warranty about to expire or no warranty coverage at all, listen up. CarShield has a low-cost month-to-month vehicle protection plan that covers more parts than ever. Visit carshield.com/audio to find out how you could pay almost nothing for covered auto repairs. Drivers who activate this vehicle protection today will also receive free roadside assistance, free towing, and car rental options at no additional cost. Get your free quote today at carshield.com/audio. That's carshield.com/audio.
Okay, we are back. So I don't think we need to go through all 9, but if you can give just a little bit from the, probably, I don't know, are they most popular? Are they all kind of the same? Like amount of people fall into the different 9, or is like they're kind of the top 4 Enneagram types? How would you, if you can pick a couple, how would you offer some support? How would they differ? So if you had like a 1 or a 3 or a 5, how would you differ how you work with them?
Oh, that's such a good question. Now I wish Steph and I had gone through our podcast analytics to see, is there one type that's being listened to more often than others? You're going to notice some common themes through many of these different types, but I love how they each put their own flavor on it. So let me give you an example. Let's take a look at our Enneagram 7s. And again, these people, they're just so fun. But Stephanie mentioned how they like new experiences, they like new things. And I feel like if you know that about yourself, then you're not going to want to be in a super restrictive birthing environment. And so it's important for you to then evaluate your options. Is the birthplace I'm currently at, are they going to be absolutely supportive of freedom of movement? Am I going to be able to have a range of options, eating and drinking during labor, freedom to forego the IV if that's something that's important to you, freedom to wear my own clothes? I just feel like the more options you can keep open and on the table as an Enneagram 7, the happier you're going to feel in your birthing environment.
Okay, what can you offer for any of the others?
Yeah, so the one that stands out for me is the peacemaker. This is our Enneagram 9, because they're so easygoing and they seem like they're kind of happy with everything, or they're really mellow. And this is the mom that often gets walked kind of all over during coming up to the birth and actually in the birth space. This is the one that needs a really strong partner and a really good birth team that is going to trust and love on her and respect what her needs needs are so that she doesn't have to fight for them, because she won't. And so I think kind of on her, so this is our very spiritual one. She's in tune with her body. And if given that space, if you're circling the wagons for her, like you said, this is the woman that will be able to tune into her body and have one of the most incredible, it'll touch everybody in the room. She's spiritually grounded. She's in tune with her body, in tune with her baby. When she has that space and that ability to trust herself, her births are incredible every time.
And what happens if she doesn't have that sense of safety and security?
Yeah. And that's, I mean, right, this would be for anyone, but this will affect her in a much stronger way. Excuse me. So in her case, if she doesn't have that kind of support, then she's going to walk out of there feeling, like she's not as well loved, like she's uncomfortable. It can actually affect traumatized. This is the PTSD mom. It can also affect the labor. So these are the moms that if they're not given that space to tune in and listen to their body and take control, in like an inward way, these are the moms that you see. The doctor comes in and all of a sudden her contractions are being weird, or she's not handling them well all of a sudden, or she was 6 centimeters last time she was checked, but the doctor told her that she only has this much time left. And next time she's checked, she's 5 centimeters. And so she can really get thrown off if she's not in a good place herself and hasn't set up the correct birth team for herself. And I mean, isn't that a blessing? Like that's where doulas come in and preparation. So.
Yeah, I've seen those births, and I've heard about those births, and that is sad, because we never want someone to come out of birth feeling traumatized. And I can see if someone is very open and vulnerable, that if they're not well supported and protected during that, it can really damage them. Let's talk about the perfectionist. Maybe it's just because I'm in the New York City area, but this has been coming up in classes a lot of conversation about control. And I've seen that in births about, it's a lot about surrender, and there's so much unknown. When is it going to start? What is it going to be like? How long is it going to be? How am I going to handle it? And so just because it's just been such a theme, I've been hearing the students have been so open and vulnerable of sharing. I'd love to hear how you'd prepare for that and how you'd support that.
So the interesting thing about anybody that has perfectionist tendencies, even if you're not sure if you're an Enneagram 1 here, is that, relaxation and surrender is such an important part of that first stage of birth, that dilation. If you're not relaxed and you're not surrendering, in a way, you're kind of fighting what your body's trying to do, which is counterproductive, right? But I think sometimes people bring those perfectionist tendencies into birth and they get so obsessed with, am I doing this right? That can actually inhibit your ability to relax. It sounds kind of silly, right? But they're so worried about, am I relaxing right, that they're actually not relaxing. So I think for people in this category, this is where making the time to practice relaxation throughout your pregnancy, to practice labor rehearsals, to meditate, to practice deep breathing ahead of time so that it becomes what Steph and I call muscle memory for you, is going to make it so that you don't have to worry about any of those things coming in and manifesting themselves during your birth, those perfectionist tendencies. We truly believe that whatever you practice, if every time you practice relaxation in preparation for birth, you have your favorite aromatherapy going and you're listening to maybe a birth playlist you've made, or some meditation tracks through your birth course or something, or your partner's touching you in a certain way, whatever it is, whatever's setting that environment, if you can continue to use those things and your body relaxes in kind and responds to that, then when you introduce those same elements to your birth space, your body's going to naturally relax and you don't have to worry about that perfectionist tendency coming in and inhibiting anything.
Yeah, I use that theory a lot in class, like the Pavlov's dog. Like, okay, I'm going to do, maybe it's a certain kind of breathing count. Like today in this morning class, we did a 3 count inhale and a 6 count exhale, one, because everyone was sounding really stressed. Maybe it's because it's March 1st and we're now like, oh my God, we've been in this a year. And so there's a lot of anxiety. So I was trying to work on the parasympathetic nervous system. So I wanted that longer exhale. But if we keep practicing it, it sounds like you and I are talking the same thing.
Yep.
Once we start to introduce it, the body's like, oh, here I am. Yes, I'm supposed to relax now. So it sounds like we kind of see the same page on that. What about when the client, you kind of touched on this, am I doing it right? And I've heard that from students. I don't know if I'm birthing right, or the birth was just so different than they had envisioned that they feel like they failed in some way. How do you work with that? How do you prepare that perfectionist that they may not be on birth plan A, B? They might be like down to, like X, Y, Z, like it's just so different than they had envisioned. And then if they have those control perfectionist tendencies, to open the idea that they didn't fail. Am I making sense?
No, you totally are. And I think, I might not be a 1, but I can sit on that. You know what I mean? And I get stuck on it. And if I, like with my first birth, that's very much how I felt. I failed and I didn't do this right. And with my second birth, I had some of that kind of with me at the same time. And so there are some things that you can do. I think number 1 is understanding that, even like when we talk about a birth plan, like we don't even call it a plan because there's no such thing, right? Like it's a map. There are different roads to get to this destination and there are twists and turns and everything in between. And so understanding what those things are so that you're not blindsided by it, I think is number 1. Having the knowledge to take with you into the birth space, having the preparation. If you know that you've done the things, like especially with that perfectionist, they're the queen of checking off the to-do list, right? So they're the ones that if you tell them to practice relaxation for 10 to 15 minutes, 2 times a day, they're going to do it and they're going to feel good about doing it.
Yeah, they're going to get 2 hours a day. Right. They're like, I did it and I did it even more.
Right. And so, but that's back to your point, right? Like what if they've done all these things and then they don't get the birth that they're looking for? I think there's a lot of mindset work that goes around that. And that's prior to, and also after the birth is done. Birth doesn't end just because we had a baby, we bring that same person through into the next phase with us. And then we won't get into hormones and everything else that gets involved at that point. But if you're just talking about the mindset work and the tendencies of a type 1, even using something like we have a find it and flip it exercise. Basically, it's taking any fears or doubts or negative thoughts that you're having, writing it down. And on the opposite side, you write 2 positive things in the exact opposition to that fear or doubt or negative thought. And you say it out loud. And I'm sure you've had, experience with this, but you look at yourself in the mirror and you say it out loud and you believe it. You say it as if it's true and you keep doing that over and over. And maybe that sounds silly. Maybe that sounds a little woo-woo, but it's not. And it works. And that has a lot of power in how you move into that next stage. The other thing I would say is making sure to share your birth story. You can't keep it in your head because we know anything is crazier and more messed up when we keep it to ourselves and we run it around in circles and we tell ourselves lies about it. And so saying it out loud, allowing it to lose the power, telling it to somebody that you trust that can give you positive energy, positive feedback, that I think those 2 things are going to be your top tools.
And then I'm going to add to that. I think not just saying your birth story, because I have seen people almost re-traumatize themselves by living
that's a good
that, you know
what
I mean? So, I worked with somebody, I did a birthing from within mentorship and Nikki, I'm losing her last name, something with an S. She does a lot about birth story processing, and it was so powerful because we can, and I've seen this with students and even myself at certain things about my first birth, just keep retelling it almost like I can't believe it. And it's still so raw. And like, it's just they're re-traumatizing themselves. So processing it, I think I just wanted to throw that out there that I think you can take it even deeper, but yeah, letting go. And like you were saying, your first birth, and I'm going to relate to that. My first birth, going to my second birth, I had a lot of processing to do because I carried that fear of like, oh my gosh.
If you're ever curious about how well you processed, go into your next birth, right?
And then you're like, oh, not processed at all. All right. So we talked a little about 1, and then we talked about, I think 9, and was it 5? Is there 7? Is there one?
Sorry. Mm-hmm.
Is there one more that you want to just talk a little bit about how they may approach how they can start to approach their birth?
Yeah. So I'm going to I don't want to say pick on. I'm going to pick our type A, our challenger. One of the things that's so admirable about this person in their birth space is if they have a conviction that they should eat and drink during their birth, they have no problem saying no to anybody that presents a different opinion. They're very firm in their beliefs, and they shouldn't be taken trivially. This is somebody who has researched their stuff. They feel that they're the authority. And so they're strong and they're resolute in those decisions. Nobody's going to be pushing them into something that isn't a part of their birth plan within reason, right? And I love that they know their own mind and heart. One of the challenges that they can sometimes face, though, in birth is that, we talked about already that birth is an incredibly vulnerable experience. And the type 8 sort of believes that vulnerability is weakness. And so that's a mindset shift that they need to make, that being vulnerable, letting others know when you need support and this isn't feeling right, or I need some help right now. That is strength. And I feel like, again, that's work that needs to start taking place long before it's birthing time. This is something where you're working with a birth team on, you're doing the necessary mindset work to prepare for that. You're having conversations with your partner ahead of time and saying, I know I don't always open up, but these are some fears or concerns that I'm having about birth. And can you help me and give them suggest ways that they can help you through that process? And hey, I find that if I'm acting like this, it's usually because I'm feeling this way. And this is what I would love from you. So I think that's really helpful for them to know.
That's a lot. I was going to say, it reminds me of Cortney has this doula client that she talks about, right? The girl with the ice. Tell them the story about the ice.
I'm trying to remember this.
The one that she wanted to drink water and they wouldn't let her drink water.
This is awesome.
She has to be an 8, right?
She had to have been. I realize now in hindsight, that's probably true. So the nurse comes in and we're working away and she sees my client taking a swig of water, or I don't know, whatever coconut water she was drinking. And she goes, no, you can only have ice chips. And the girl looks at her, she goes, okay, fine, but I like my ice chips melted, and takes another swig off her bottle. I was like, what a woman. First of all, I want to be one of those people who's so quick on the spot with the comebacks, right? But I laughed about that. I thought that was awesome.
What kind of struck me is that it's asking a lot of that person who might be the challenger and very strong to sit and go back, like pull that curtain back to their vulnerabilities and then share that. I can see the benefit of it. Oh, I totally get that because I'm not the best at that. And so I could see the benefit to revealing the kind of help you need, but I could imagine it being really challenging for that person to get there.
It is, which is why we give the tip for their partner. Listen, she may not vocalize her feelings and her fears during birth. And so we want you to kind of assume that she has them anyway and speak to those. Stand strong in your role as her birth partner, even if you're like, why am I saying these? She seems to be doing fine. She probably doesn't want me to say. You stand strong in your role and you be affirmative and you be supportive and you give wonderful verbal and physical support. Even if she's not asking it, just assume that maybe there's some fear or some concern that she's hanging on to and speak to that. So I think this is where birth isn't a solo sport. You need a whole team, and you need that team to know you and what you're about and what your birth is about.
Yeah. Oh, I love the idea of the team. I keep thinking though, how to use this information, because it is definitely a privilege to know your team ahead of time and to have a doula. But what about the situations where they're kind of walking in and maybe they don't have support, how they can share this information with, if there's just a nurse and a partner and there's not a doula, or I don't know, I'm just trying to think of certain situations where they may not have had the chance to communicate as well. Is it something that you recommend writing up, or the partner pulls aside the nurse and be like, this is really going to be helpful or not helpful? What are your thoughts on that?
Definitely. I think that there are, if you're walking into a space, you don't know who your nurse is going to be or who your birth assistant is going to be. We really like to encourage our students when they're creating their birth map that they have some kind of, and it doesn't have to be long, but a few sentences of introduction. Who are you? What are you about? You can make it funny or clever. You can just get to the point. But I feel like this would be a really good space to put a little about yourself and how you anticipate what your needs might be or your reactions during labor and how they can support you. And then I think there has to be trust then. So you put in a little effort, you write a little bit up in your birth map, birth plan, and you pass it off to that person. And certainly if your partner can speak to that, that's wonderful too. But I think then that there's so many compassionate and caring birth professionals out there and nurses and things that, I think the likelihood of you getting somebody who will read that and really work and to support you in the way that you've said you might need it, I think is highly likely.
Yeah. And I think too, when you walk into a birth space, if you're talking about not knowing necessarily, like if you go to a doctor's, you're not going to know who your assistants are, your nurses are that are going to be on duty that day. Maybe you've never met anyone in your birth space. And so understanding that you don't know their Enneagram, you don't know where they're coming from, what their home life is like and all of that. I think we also really encourage, bring a nurse basket, right? Bring something.
Make some friends.
Right. Exactly. All the Enneagrams are going to love having something nice given to them, being kind and respectful, using a first name, just, general things that we say are do unto others. But I think that's important if you're going into a space that you're not quite sure of and you're trying to get comfortable.
Sometimes they don't even know the doctor they're going to have. I know a lot of the practices in New York, they can have anywhere from 4 to 12 different doctors. And while hopefully they've rotated and met them, they may not know who exactly is going to be there. Okay, we're going to take one more break, and we come back. If you could offer one tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new or expectant parents, we'll be right back. Okay, so throw it out there, whatever. It doesn't have to be Enneagram. It can be anything. What is one tip or piece of advice that is just kind of burning in your heart that you want to share with new or expectant parents?
Don't underestimate the power of birth. I think that has been the biggest one that has come out there lately. Even if we're looking at people that follow us and they ask all the questions and they're doing there is a power to birth. And I think if you can get into it, if you start, recognizing, understanding, acknowledging, pulling all the information that you can, get that preparation. I don't think you can prepare you're never going to prepare too much. We don't see anybody that reads too many books or takes too many meditations or is unhappy with the amount of relaxation that they did or time they spent with their partner. You cannot prepare too much. And so I think when we're talking about the power of birth, we're thinking about the power of birth, and Cortney might feel differently. I kind of jumped on this one. But there's a power to it. And oftentimes I know myself, I totally did this with my first, I was like, everybody does this from the beginning of time. It can't be that big of a deal. I read the book. I read a birth story. That's what I want mine to look like. I did no preparation and it ended in a cesarean birth. And I went, wait, why did that happen? So I think there's a power to birth and it would be in our best interest to not underestimate that power.
Okay. Cortney, did you want to?
Yeah, no pressure.
I love it because it's broad enough that you could take anything from that. There's power in birth. So I like to say, depending on where you live, the country you're in, statistics are such that you might have an average of, 1.62 children. So the idea being that birth isn't something that you're going to get to do all that many times in your life. And like Stephanie said, I don't think you're ever going to regret investing in preparation, investing in knowledge. And so I think if you can recognize that and say, you know what, there's power in birth experiences and power in birth stories. And I want to have powerful experiences that I can cherish for the rest of my life, then I think that changes your approach to how you prepare, and I think sets you up for having a birth that you'll love.
That is great. Okay, where can people find your work?
So we are, if you're looking for us on Instagram, we are at My Essential Birth, all one word. And then if you want to find information about the birth course or listen to the podcast, it's at www.myessentialbirth.com.
Yeah. And it's the podcast is the Pregnancy and Birth Made Easy podcast.
And I will have all that in the show notes, along with that book that you recommended. I'll make sure I wrote it down correctly. The Road Back to You. Is that correct?
That's the one.
Perfect. I'll make sure that's in our show notes. I want to thank you guys so much. I really enjoyed this. I am going to, as soon as my kids go to bed tonight, I am taking that test. I'm going to make my husband take the test. I'm just fascinated by this. I think anything that just gives us a better sense of, I don't use the word weaknesses, but maybe, or even flaws, just our other side of greatness.
So I like that. Yeah.
So that we know, when that other side's coming up that may not be as favorable, that we can work with ourselves, and then that how we relate to others, and how we relate to our birth and our children and our partners. So this has been really exciting and really fun. So thank you for your time.
Thanks Deborah, and thank you to your listeners.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
Waiting on a tax return? Hopefully it ends up in your hands. Fraudulent tax returns due to identity theft increased by 30% in 2023. If you're in a bind this tax season, LifeLock can help. Our U.S.-based restoration specialists are experts dedicated to helping solve your identity theft issues. And all LifeLock plans are backed by the $1 Million Protection Package. So we'll reimburse you up to the limits of your plan if you lose money due to identity theft. Help protect your information this tax season with LifeLock. Save up to 25% your first year at LifeLock.com/aware.